I died during an alien abduction. My heart stopped for 11 minutes while I floated inside that light. The doctors confirmed it, clinical death. But what brought me back wasn't God, it wasn't angels, and it wasn't any divine force that religion taught us to believe in. It was something far more disturbing, something that had been watching me from the other side. And when I came back, I brought a message that no human being should ever know. It was a Thursday night in late September when everything changed. I remember because I had just finished a video call with my team discussing a deployment scheduled for Friday morning. The call ended at 9:47 p.m. I poured myself a glass of scotch, sat down at my desk to review some code, and that's when I first heard it, the humming. At first, it was so low I thought I was imagining it, a rumble just at the edge of hearing, like distant thunder or a semi-truck on a highway miles away. But there were no highways near my cabin, and the sky was clear. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the darkness. Nothing, just the shapes of pine trees silhouetted against the starlight. I sat back down, tried to focus on my screen, but the humming grew louder. It wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from everywhere at once, vibrating through the walls, the floor, my chest. My coffee mug began to rattle against the wooden desk. The hanging lamp above me swayed slightly, its chain clinking. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, a third time, and they went out completely. The humming deepened, dropping into a frequency I could feel in my bone. My teeth ached. My sinuses felt pressurized, like I was diving deep underwater. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, but the screen was frozen, displaying 9:53 p.m., the numbers glitching and repeating. That's when the pressure began. It started as a tightness in my chest, like someone pressing down on my sternum. I stood up, gasping, thinking it was a heart attack, but this was different. The air itself felt thick, viscous, like it was being compressed around me. Every breath took effort. The room began to spin, or maybe I was spinning. I couldn't tell. The darkness seemed to move, to pulse in rhythm with the humming. I stumbled toward the door, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. My vision narrowed to a tunnel. I could see the doorknob, could see my hand reaching for it, but the distance between us kept expanding, stretching like I was looking through a funhouse mirror. And then I saw the light. It came through the walls, not breaking through them, but seeping through them like they were made of water, pure white, but not painful to look at. It didn't illuminate the room so much as replace it. The cabin, my furniture, the physical world, it all dissolved into that light. I wanted to scream, but I had no voice. I wanted to run, but I had no body. I was floating, suspended in brightness that seemed alive, aware, studying me. And in that moment, just before everything went completely white, I felt my heart stop. Not slow down, not skip a beat, stop. Clinical death, the doctors would later tell me, is defined as the cessation of blood circulation and breathing. When your heart stops, your brain has approximately 4 to 6 minutes before irreversible damage begins. After 10 minutes, survival is rare. After 15, it's nearly impossible. I was gone for 11 minutes, but I wasn't just gone. I was somewhere else. The first sensation I remember after my heart stopped was weightlessness, not like floating in water, but like gravity itself had been revoked. There was no up or down, no sense of my body's position in space. I should have been terrified, should have been fighting to breathe, but breathing didn't seem necessary anymore. Neither did panic. It was as if fear itself had been temporarily suspended along with everything else. The light surrounded me completely. Inside it, I could sense movement, patterns flowing through the brightness like currents in an invisible ocean. They weren't random. They were deliberate, purposeful, carrying information I couldn't decode but could somehow feel. It was like standing next to a conversation in a language you don't speak, but understanding the emotional content anyway. That's when I became aware of them. The presences. They weren't visible, not in any conventional sense, but I could feel them observing me, moving around the edges of my perception. They weren't hostile, but they weren't comforting either. Their attention felt clinical, detached, the way a scientist might observe bacteria under a microscope. I was a specimen, a subject, something to be examined. I tried to move, to turn my head, to look at them directly, but I had no head to turn, no eyes to see with. Yet somehow I was seeing, perceiving, aware of everything around me with a clarity that was almost painful. It was like having every sense operating simultaneously at maximum capacity, while having no sensory organs at all. Then came the touch. Not physical contact, but something pressing against my consciousness itself. It felt like fingers made of thought, probing the structure of my mind, peeling back layers of memory, personality, identity. I experienced my entire life in reverse, not as a linear sequence, but as a simultaneous whole. My childhood, my first kiss, my father's funeral, my college graduation, every mundane moment and every significant event all happening at once, all being examined, catalogued, measured. And then, cutting through everything else, came the voice. It wasn't a sound, it was a thought pressed directly into my awareness with such force that it felt like it had always been there, like I had always known these words but had simply forgotten until this moment. We watched you die before you were born. The statement made no logical sense, yet it carried an absolute certainty that crushed any skepticism I might have had. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't philosophical. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same casual confidence you might use to mention the weather. I tried to respond, to ask what that meant, who they were, where I was, but my thoughts scattered before they could form coherent question. The light intensified, growing brighter while somehow growing darker, and I realized I was moving, or being moved, pulled deeper into something vast. The white brightness began to darken at the edges, like ink spreading through water. The warmth I'd felt, if it was warmth, drained away, replaced by a cold that wasn't temperature but absence, an absence of life, of hope, of anything that made existence bearable. I was descending into the void, not falling because there was no gravity, no sense of movement or speed, but I was definitely going somewhere. The light above me, if there was an above, became distant, a shrinking point in infinite darkness. And in that darkness, I began to see things, shapes that weren't shapes, forms that existed in more dimensions than I could process. They drifted past me, through me, some pausing as if curious, others ignoring me completely. I understood in a way that bypassed rational thought that these were other consciousnesses, other minds. Some were human, or had been human once. Others were fundamentally alien, structured in ways so different from human thought that touching them was like trying to grab smoke. Were these the dead, souls waiting for judgment, ghosts caught between worlds? No, they were something else entirely. They were the observed, and that's when I understood. Death wasn't an ending. It was a transition into a state where you became visible to something that had always been watching. These beings, these presences, they existed in the space between life and death, feeding on the moments of transition, harvesting something from consciousness as it crossed over. But I wasn't supposed to know that. Not yet. My descent stopped. I hung suspended in the darkness, no longer moving, no longer alone. Something was coming toward me. At first, it looked like a distortion in the void, a shimmer, like heat rising from pavement on a summer day. except there was no heat here. Only cold, only absence. As it approached, the distortion began to coalesce, taking on a form that my mind struggled to interpret. It was tall, impossibly tall, stretching in ways that suggested it existed in more than 3 dimensions. Its shape was humanoid only in the loosest sense. 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, something approximating a head. But the proportions were wrong. The limbs too long, too thin, jointed in too many places. Its surface, if it had a surface, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was like looking at a hole in reality shaped like a person, a 3-dimensional shadow with depth and substance, but no color, no texture, no features that I could focus on. It had no eyes, but I felt it seeing me, not just looking at me, but seeing through me, as the surface of consciousness, into whatever lay beneath. Its gaze, if that's what it was, felt like pressure, like invisible hands pushing against the inside of my skull, testing the boundaries of my mind. It stopped several feet away from me, or what I perceived as several feet. Distance worked strangely in this place. One moment it seemed far away, the next it was close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from it. A chill that went deeper than temperature, deeper than physical sensation. It was the cold of entropy, of heat, death, of the universe winding down to nothing. Then it spoke, not with sound, but with thought, pure, crystalline concepts delivered directly into my consciousness with surgical precision. You do not belong here. The words carried layers of meaning. I didn't belong here in this moment, yes, but also in a larger sense. I didn't belong in the architecture of reality that this place represented. I was an intrusion, an anomaly, something that had slipped through a crack it wasn't supposed to see. I tried to respond, but I had no voice here. My thoughts felt sluggish, ineffective, like trying to speak underwater. But you were chosen to see, it continued. Chosen? By whom? For what purpose? Before I could formulate the questions, the being reached toward me. Its arm extended, lengthening impossibly, and though it never physically touched me, I felt it inside my mind. Not violating, not invading, but present, like someone had opened a door in my consciousness that I didn't know existed, and was now standing in the doorway, observing the rooms beyond. Every memory I had was suddenly accessible to it. Every thought, every dream, every secret shame and hidden hope, all of it laid bare and examined with the casual efficiency of someone flipping through a filing cabinet. I felt exposed in a way that went beyond physical nakedness. This was the nakedness of the soul itself, every pretense stripped away, every lie I'd ever told myself revealed for what it was. And then it showed me something. Images flooded my mind, not memories, but visions, scenes from places I'd never been, times I'd never lived. I saw ancient civilizations worshiping lights in the sky, not as gods, but as something else, something they understood we had forgotten. I saw the construction of monuments not meant to honor the dead, but to mark the boundaries between worlds. I saw rituals performed not out of superstition, but out of knowledge, terrible knowledge of what waited on the other side. I saw people like me throughout history who had died and been brought back. They always changed. They always knew something afterward that they couldn't express, and they were always watched afterward, marked by their journey, visible to things that most humans would never perceive. I saw Daniel Harper, the man whose recordings I would later find, standing in a field at night, looking up at a light descending from the sky. I saw him die. I saw him return. I saw him slowly go mad, trying to understand what had been done to him. And I saw myself, not as I was now, but as I would be, standing in my cabin weeks from now, writing these words, trying desperately to communicate what happened, while knowing that language would fail me. I saw myself looking in mirrors and seeing something else looking back. I saw myself hearing that humming sound for the rest of my life, growing louder each year, calling me back, because I had made a mistake. I had seen too much. "You brought something back with you," the being said, and I realized it wasn't talking about knowledge or memories. It was talking about itself. The moment I understood what it meant, that this thing, this presence, would follow me back into life, my consciousness rebelled. Every part of my being that had been passive, observant, frozen in the face of the impossible, suddenly screamed in unified rejection. No. It was the first coherent thought I'd managed since arriving in this place, and it erupted from somewhere deeper than my conscious mind. It was primal, instinctual, the same force that makes a drowning person fight for the surface even when they've already inhaled water. I felt myself pulling away from the being, or perhaps it was releasing me. The darkness around us began to crack, fissures of white light breaking through like dawn through clouds. The being didn't retreat, but it began to fade, its form dissolving back into the void. Its final words pressed into my mind with the weight of prophecy. "Tell them what you saw." Then the light consumed everything. I was rushing upward, or maybe forward or backward, through layers of existence that peeled away like pages in a book. I saw flashes of my own life rewinding. My apartment in college, my high school cafeteria, my childhood bedroom with its glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. But these weren't memories. They felt more like anchor points, landmarks my conscience was using to find its way back to my body. And then, with a violence that felt like being hit by a truck, I slammed back into physical reality. Pain. The first thing I felt was pain. Not just physical pain, though that was overwhelming. My chest was on fire, my ribs screaming where the compressions had cracked them. Every nerve in my body lit up like someone had poured gasoline on them and struck a match. But beneath the physical pain was something worse, the sensation of being compressed, stuffed back into a container far too small for what I'd become. It was like trying to pour an ocean into a teacup. My consciousness had expanded in that place between, had existed without the constraints of a physical brain, and now it was being forced back into 3 pounds of meat with finite capacity. I opened my eyes, fluorescent lights, white ceiling tiles, the steady beep of a heart monitor that had recently been screaming. Voices shouting, hands on my body, the rubber smell of medical gloves, the sting of 4 lines in my arms. "We got him back." A doctor's face appeared above me, young, male, with sweat on his forehead and relief in his eyes. He was saying something about my heart, about how lucky I was, about how they'd almost lost me. But his words sounded distant, muffled, like I was hearing them through water, because I could still feel it. The being, the presence from the void. It hadn't stayed behind, it had come with me. I tried to speak, to warn them, but my throat was raw from the intubation, and all that came out was a croak. The doctor misinterpreted it as confusion, as post-resuscitation delirium, which was understandable. How could I explain that something from the other side of death had followed me back? How could I make them understand that the humming sound had never stopped, that I could still hear it underneath all the hospital noise, a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur? They sedated me. I remember fighting it, trying to stay awake, terrified of what I might see if I closed my eye. But the drugs were too strong, and I felt consciousness slipping away again, spiraling down into darkness. But this darkness was different. This was just sleep, just normal human sleep. Except it wasn't. In my dreams, if they were dreams, I stood in that void again. The being was there, motionless, watching me from the space between heartbeats. It didn't speak, it didn't need to. Its presence alone was a message. I see you. I'm still here. I will always be here. I woke up screaming. They kept me in the ICU for 3 days. The official diagnosis was sudden cardiac arrest of unknown etiology, medical speak for your heart just stopped, and we don't know why. They ran every test imaginable: EKGs, echocardiograms, stress tests, blood work, genetic screening for heart conditions. Everything came back normal. You're incredibly lucky, Dr. Sarah Chun told me on the second day. She was the cardiologist assigned to my case, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the sort of calm competence that comes from years of dealing with cardiac emergencies. 11 minutes is a long time. Most people don't come back from that without significant brain damage, but your cognitive function seems completely intact. I wanted to laugh. Cognitive function intact? I was seeing shadow people in the corners of my room. I could hear whispers in the white noise of the ventilation system. Every time someone walked past my door, I felt a spike of fear that they weren't human, that they were one of those presences from the void, wearing a person's shape like a costume. But I didn't tell her that. I'd already made the mistake of mentioning strange experiences to the psychiatrist they'd sent to evaluate me. She'd been polite, professional, and had ultimately concluded that I was experiencing post-traumatic stress from the cardiac event, combined with possible oxygen deprivation hallucinations. She prescribed anti-anxiety medication and recommended therapy. The medication didn't help. The hallucinations didn't stop because they weren't hallucinations. On my 3rd night in the hospital, after the nursing shift changed, I was finally alone. The machines around me beeped their rhythmic assurances that I was alive, that my heart was beating, that oxygen was flowing through my blood. But those sounds felt hollow, superficial. They measured the mechanical functions of my body while completely missing the fact that something else was inhabiting it with me. I looked at my reflection in the window. The lights of the city glowed in the distance, and in that darkened glass I could see myself, pale, hollow-eyed, IV lines snaking out of my arms, hospital gown hanging loose on my frame. I looked like what I was, a man who had died and been dragged back against his will. But there was something wrong with the reflection. It moved a fraction of a second too late. I turned my head to the left. My reflection followed, but not quite synchronously, like there was lag in the signal. I lifted my hand slowly. The reflection lifted its hand. But for just a moment, just the briefest instant, I could swear the reflection kept its hand down while mine was already up. My skin crawled. I pressed the call button for the nurse, but by the time she arrived, my reflection was behaving normally again. She checked my vitals, asked if I was in pain, and eventually left with a reminder to try to get some sleep. Sleep, right. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I lay there in the darkness, listening to the humming sound that never went away. It was quieter here in the hospital, almost drowned out by all the medical equipment, but it was still there, a subaudible vibration in the fabric of reality itself, and I began to notice the patterns. The humming would intensify every 37 minutes. I timed it on the clock above my door. Like clockwork, the frequency would increase, my pulse would spike, and I'd feel that presence drawing closer, pressing against the edges of my perception. Then it would fade again, receding but never disappearing completely. 37 minutes. The number felt significant, but I couldn't understand why. On the 4th day, they moved me to a regular room. My heart was stable, my tests were normal, and the hospital needed the ICU bed for someone whose condition was more acute. Dr. Chun visited me that morning with good news. I could go home the next day. Just take it easy for a few weeks, she said. No strenuous activity. Follow up with your primary care physician. And if you experience any unusual symptoms, chest pain, shortness of breath, dizziness, come back immediately. What about shadow people in my peripheral vision? What about reflections that don't sync up? What about the feeling that something from another dimension is wearing my body like a puppet? But I just nodded and thanked her. That night, I had my first visitor. My co-worker and closest friend, Marcus, showed up with a bag of my belongings from the cabin. My laptop, some clothes, toiletries. He looked uncomfortable in the clinical environment, shifting from foot to foot, making awkward small talk about work, and how everyone was asking about me. "You scared the hell out of us, man," he said, sitting in the chair beside my bed. "When you didn't show up for the deployment meeting and didn't answer your phone, we called the police for a wellness check. They found you collapsed at your desk. If they'd arrived even 10 minutes later, ... double quotes. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We talked for a while about mundane things, the project at work, office gossip, a hiking trail he wanted to try when I recovered. Normal conversation, comforting in its banality. But the whole time I could feel it watching, the present. It was there in the room with us, invisible to Marcus but obvious to me, standing in the corner where the shadows were deepest, patient, and eternal. Marcus noticed me glancing at the corner. "You okay?" he asked. "You keep looking over there like there's something." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." He left after about an hour, promising to check on me once I was home. After he was gone, I turned to look at the corner where I'd felt the presence. Nothing, just shadows. But then the lights flickered just once, and I heard it again. The humming, now louder, more insistent. And in the space between heartbeats, I could have sworn I saw it. A tall, thin silhouette against the wall, featureless and dark, watching me with eyes it didn't have. I closed my eyes and counted backward from 100, a meditation technique my therapist had taught me years ago. When I opened them again, the corner was empty. But I knew it wasn't really gone. It would never really be gone, because it lived inside me now. They discharged me on a Friday morning, exactly 5 days after my cardiac arrest. I signed the paperwork, collected my prescriptions, and listened patiently as Dr. Chun gave me her final instructions about recovery and follow-up appointments. I nodded at all the right time, asked all the appropriate questions, and maintained the appearance of a patient who is grateful to be alive and eager to resume normal life. But normal life was over. I knew that the moment Marcus pulled his car up to my cabin, and I saw the yellow police tape still fluttering from the porch railing. "They had to break the door to get in," Marcus explained, killing the engine. "I had a locksmith come out to replace it, but I didn't go inside. I figured you'd want to handle your own stuff." I thanked him, assured him I'd be fine alone, and watched as he drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway with a bag of hospital belongings and a growing sense of dread. The cabin looked different. Not physically. It was the same structure, same windows, same worn wooden siding I'd been meaning to repair for 2 years. But it felt different, like returning to a childhood home after decades away and finding it smaller, stranger, not quite matching your memories. I approached the door slowly. The new lock gleamed bronze against the old wood, the only modern thing on the weathered structure. My hand shook as I inserted the key, and for a moment I considered turning around, getting back in Marcus's car, going literally anywhere else. But where would I go? The presence had followed me to the hospital. It would follow me anywhere. The door swung open with a creak that I'd always found charming before, but now sounded ominous. The interior was dark, curtains drawn, exactly how the paramedics had left it after pulling me out on a stretcher. My desk was still cluttered with work papers. My coffee mug still sat where I'd left it. The scotch I'd poured, still in the glass beside it, evaporated down to a syrupy residue. And there, on the floor near my desk chair, was a dark stain where I'd fallen. Blood? I touched my head, feeling the scar where I'd apparently hit it on the way down. No one had mentioned that detail in the hospital. The injury was minor compared to dying for 11 minutes. I set my bag down and walked through the cabin, turning on lights, opening curtains, trying to flood the space with normalcy. But every shadow seemed deeper than it should be. Every reflection in every window seemed to move just slightly wrong. And that humming, that damned humming, was louder here than anywhere else, vibrating through the walls, making the windows rattle in their frames. I went to my laptop, still sitting on the desk, and opened it. The screen flickered to life, showing my desktop exactly as I'd left it. Code editor open, terminal window running, a dozen browser tabs waiting for attention. The timestamp showed the last activity at 9:52 p.m. on that Thursday night. 1 minute before everything changed. I started researching, not work, not code. I opened private browsing windows and began searching for anything related to near-death experience. Alien abductions, clinical death, consciousness transfer, quantum immortality, interdimensional beings. Every fringe topic I'd previously dismissed as pseudoscience or delusion. The results were overwhelming. Thousands of accounts from people claiming similar experiences. Most were obviously fabricated or misremembered dreams. Some were clearly psychotic breaks, but a small percentage had details that matched my own experience with uncanny precision. The humming sound, the white light that seemed alive, the feeling of being examined, the sensation of something following them back. One account from a woman in Ontario who'd been clinically dead for 7 minutes after a car accident described what she called the lag effect, the feeling that her actions and thoughts were being processed through something else before being executed, like her consciousness was now running on a server somewhere else, receiving delayed inputs from her body. That was it. That was exactly what I'd been feeling, but couldn't articulate. Another account from a man in Germany who'd drowned and been resuscitated mentioned seeing symbols appearing on his skin at night, faint glowing marks that faded by morning, like ultraviolet burns. He'd posted photographs. The symbols weren't from any known language, but they had a geometric consistence that suggested meaning, purpose. I looked down at my own arms, rolled up my sleeves, and found nothing, but it was still daylight. The accounts had said the marks only appeared at night. I kept reading, clicking from site to site, following rabbit holes deeper into the internet's strangest corners. And that's when I found the first mention of Daniel Harper. It was just a footnote in a forum discussion about unexplained disappearances. A single sentence. Anyone remember the Daniel Harper tapes from '89? I searched the name. Almost nothing came up. A few more forum mentions, a deleted YouTube video, a reference in an archived conspiracy theory blog. But finally I found something concrete. A Dropbox link, still active, shared by someone with a username LastWitness88. The folder contained audio files, dozens of them, all labeled with dates from August through November 1989, and all credited to Daniel Harper. I downloaded them all and started with the first one. The audio quality was poor, cassette tape transferred to digital, with all the hiss and warble that implied. But the voice was clear enough, male, middle-aged, with a slight southern accent and the careful diction of someone trying very hard to sound rational while describing something insane. This is Daniel Harper. Today is August 15th, 1989. I'm recording this because I need to document what's happening to me, and I need to do it while I still can, while I'm still myself. My psychiatrist says it's therapeutic to talk about trauma, but this isn't trauma. This is documentation, evidence, because if what I think is happening is actually happening, then someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what's on the other side. A pause. The sound of ice cubes clinking in a glass, liquid being poured. Then it started 3 weeks ago on July 23rd at approximately 11:47 p.m. I was driving home from my shift at the plant, taking Highway 76 like I always do. Clear night, no traffic, radio playing some talk show I wasn't really listening to. Then the radio went to static, pure white noise, loud enough that I reached over to turn it down. That's when I saw the light. I leaned closer to my laptop, the hair on my arms standing up. It came from above, descending so fast I thought it was going to hit me. I slammed on the brakes and my car just died. Engine cut out, headlights went dark, even my watch stopped. Everything stopped except me and that light. It was so bright, but it didn't hurt to look at. And it had a sound, this deep humming, that I felt in my chest more than heard. Like standing next to a generator, but deeper, older. The humming. He'd experienced the same thing. I don't remember getting out of the car, but suddenly I was standing on the road, looking up at this thing. It wasn't a craft, not like you see in movies. It was just light. Pure light, shaped like, I don't know how to describe it. A column, a beam, but it had edges, boundaries, like it was solid, even though it clearly wasn't. Harper's voice began to crack slightly, fear bleeding through the controlled tone. And then I was inside it. Not pulled in, not lifted up, just suddenly there, floating in whiteness with no sense of up or down. That's when my heart stopped. I know it stopped because I could feel it not beating, feel the blood not moving, feel my lungs not breathing. But I was still conscious, still aware, still existing in that light while my body died. I felt my own heart rate increasing, my palms sweating. He was describing exactly what I'd experienced, what the doctors couldn't explain. They found me the next morning, still in my car on the side of the road. A trucker called it in. The paramedics said I'd been dead for at least an hour, maybe longer. Rigor mortis had started. My core temperature had dropped to 89 degrees, but when they loaded me onto the stretcher, my heart started beating again. Just like that. No defibrillator, no CPR, no medical intervention. I just came back. He took another drink. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. But I didn't come back alone. The recording continued, detailing his first weeks after the incident, the strange sensations, the feeling of being watched, the humming that never stopped, the shadows that moved wrong. Everything I was experiencing, he'd experienced first 35 years ago. I listened to the second tape, then the third, working through them chronologically. With each recording, Harper's voice became more desperate, more frayed. He described visiting doctors who found nothing wrong, psychiatrists who prescribed medication that didn't help, his wife leaving him after he tried to explain what was happening. By September, he'd stopped leaving his house. By October, he was covering his windows with aluminum foil, trying to block whatever he thought was trying to see in. His recordings became increasingly paranoid, increasingly incoherent. But it was the final tape, dated November 7th, 1989, that made my blood run cold. Harper's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse and hollow, like he'd been screaming for hours before he started recording. I understand now, he said. I understand what they are. They're not aliens. They're not demons. They're not even from the stars. They're from the other side of death. the place between. And the light isn't salvation, it's extraction. They're harvesting us, not our bodies, not our souls, our awareness, our consciousness, the part that observes, that knows it exists. That's what they want. That's what they take. That long pause filled only with that familiar humming in the background of the recording. They've been doing it forever. That's why every culture has stories about lights in the sky, about beings that take people. That's why near-death experiences all sound the same. We're cattle, we're crops, and when we die, we don't go to heaven or hell or nowhere. We go to them. We get processed, studied, and sometimes they send us back, but not to save us, to use us, to turn us into receivers, transmitters, bridges between their world and ours. His breathing was rapid now, panicked. I'm a bridge. I'm a doorway they can look through. And every day that doorway opens a little wider. Every night I see more of them. Hundreds of them now, standing around my bed, watching me, waiting for the door to open completely, waiting for the moment when there's no difference between me and them, when I become one of them, a presence, an observer, something that exists in both worlds at once, a sound in the background, footsteps, movement. They're here now. I can see them in the corner, in the closet, reflected in the dark TV screen. 3 of them tonight. No, 4. No more. They're multiplying. Or maybe they were always here, and I just couldn't see them before. Maybe everyone has them. Maybe they're standing next to every person on Earth right now, invisible, watching, waiting for the door to open. His voice dropped to a whisper, urgent and terrified. If you're listening to this, if you find these tapes, you need to understand. Don't look at the lights. Don't go into the light. If your heart stops, if you find yourself in that place between, fight it. Stay dead. Because coming back is worse. Coming back means you bring them with you. Coming back means you become a door, and doors can be opened from either side. A long silence. Then, tell them what you saw. The same words the being had said to me. That's what they keep saying. Tell them what you saw, but I can't. Every time I try, my head fills with static, my nose bleeds, my vision goes white. They don't want me to tell. They want me to be a warning that no one can understand, a message that can't be delivered, a door that's opening whether I want it to or not. Another pause. When Harper spoke again, his voice had changed. It was flat, emotionless, like someone reading a script they didn't understand. The retrieval is beginning. The harvest approaches. The boundaries are thinning. Soon, everyone will see. Soon, everyone will understand. We are not alone. We have never been alone. And what has been watching us is not benevolent. The recording ended. I sat in the darkness of my cabin, staring at my laptop screen, my hands shaking. The timestamp showed I'd been listening for over 3 hours. Outside, night had fallen completely, and in the reflection of my laptop screen, I could see my room behind me, and something standing in the corner. I spun around so fast I nearly fell out of my chair. The corner was empty. Just shadows and the edge of my bookshelf. But I had seen something in the reflection. I was certain of a tall, thin silhouette exactly like the being from the void. My heart hammered in my chest, setting off a cascade of anxiety about cardiac arrest, about dying again, about returning to that place between. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to count, to ground myself in the physical present, but the humming was louder now, much louder. It resonated through the cabin walls, through the floor, through my bones. The frequency made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. I looked at the clock, 3:11 a.m., 3:11, the same time all the clocks had stopped at in that forum post I'd read, the same time pattern that kept appearing in near-death experience accounts. 3 minutes and 11 seconds, or 11 minutes and 3 seconds, the length of time I'd been dead. The humming intensified and the lights flickered. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, but the screen was frozen, glitching, displaying fragments of numbers and symbols that weren't from any app I had installed. The patterns looked almost like the symbols people had described appearing on their skin. Geometric, precise, carrying meaning just beyond the threshold of understanding. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, my eyes slowly adjusted, and I became aware of a faint glow. It was coming from my arms. I rolled up my sleeves and stared in disbelief at what I saw. Symbols, dozens of them, tracing up my forearms in luminescent blue-white light, like phosphorescence or radioactive markers. They weren't tattoos. They were under my skin, visible through it, pulsing gently in rhythm with my heartbeat. As I watched, new ones appeared, drawing themselves into existence with painful precision, like someone was etching them into my flesh from the inside. I ran to the bathroom, turned on the light, and examined them more closely in the mirror. The symbols were complex, composed of straight lines and curves that intersected at precise angles. Some resembled circuit diagrams. Others looked almost like letters from an alphabet that had never existed. They covered both arms from wrist to elbow, glowing brighter in the darkness, fading but not disappearing entirely when exposed to light. I took photos with my phone, or tried to. Every picture came out corrupted, filled with static and distortion, the symbols barely visible through the digital noise. It was as if they existed on a wavelength that cameras couldn't properly capture. The markings didn't hurt exactly, but I could feel them, a sensation like mild electric current running through my skin, following the paths the symbols traced. And as I stared at them, trying to decipher any meaning, I began to understand something. They were coordinates, not geographic coordinates, but something more abstract. Locations in conceptual space, frequencies, addresses in a multi-dimensional reality. Each symbol was a pointer to somewhere else, and together they formed a map to the space between. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shock myself back to rationality. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of psychotic break, a hallucination caused by oxygen deprivation during the cardiac arrest, a side effect of the medications they'd given me. But the symbols remained, and the humming continued. And when I looked up from the sink into the bathroom mirror, I saw it standing behind me. The being, tall, impossibly thin, featureless and dark, its presence sucking the warmth from the air. It stood motionless, its eyeless face turned toward me, and I felt its attention, like weight, like pressure, like the moment before drowning. I screamed and spun around. Nothing. The bathroom was empty except for me, but when I turned back to the mirror, it was still there in the reflection, standing in a bathroom that existed somewhere else, watching me from the other side of the glass. "What do you want?" I shouted at the mirror, at the reflection, at the thing that had followed me back from death. The symbols on my arms flared brighter. The humming reached a crescendo that made the mirror crack, a single fracture line running diagonally from corner to corner. And in my mind, pressed directly into my consciousness with overwhelming force, came its response. Complete the circuit. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the void, felt myself falling back into it, felt the being's presence drawing closer. So I stayed awake, sitting at my desk with every light in the cabin on, researching, taking notes, trying to understand what complete the circuit meant. The symbols on my arms had faded with the sunrise, but hadn't disappeared entirely. In normal light, they were barely visible, faint lines like old scars or stretch marks, but I knew they were there. I could feel them, a constant low-level current running through my skin. I started with the obvious: electrical circuits, basic physics, the flow of energy from one point to another, completing a path that allows current to travel. But this wasn't about electricity. This was about consciousness, about the connection between life and death, between the physical world and whatever existed beyond it. I found academic papers on quantum consciousness theories, the idea that human awareness might be a quantum phenomenon, that our thoughts might exist in a superposition of states until observed. I found research on near-death experiences from medical journals, attempts to explain the phenomenon through brain chemistry, oxygen deprivation, DMT release. But none of it explained the consistence of the experiences. None of it explained why people separated by decades and continents reported identical details: the humming, the light, the beings, the feeling of being examined. None of it explained the marks or the presence that followed us back. By noon, I'd expanded my search beyond academic sources. I dove into forums, chat rooms, anonymous image boards where people shared experiences they couldn't share anywhere else. And I began to find them, the others like me, the ones who died and come back changed. They used different terms to describe it. Some called themselves returners, others used bridge people or the marked, but they all reported the same core experience: clinical death, contact with something beyond, revival, and the persistent feeling that they'd brought something back with them. Most had been institutionalized at some point. Some had committed suicide rather than continue living as doorways. A few had simply disappeared, their final posts cryptic warnings about the thinning or the harvest or the opening. One user, posting under the name Null Point, had created a detailed timeline of symptoms that matched my own experience with eerie precision. Days 1 to 3, confusion, memory gaps, feeling of displacement. Days 4 to 7, auditory hallucination, humming, visual distortions, lag effect. Days 8 to 14, physical manifestations, symbols, presence awareness. Days 15 to 30, progressive deterioration of boundary between self and other. Day 31 plus, no data. Null Point had also posted a theory scattered across multiple comments and threads. They're not aliens. They're not interdimensional beings. They're us. They're what we become after we die, after we're processed, after we're converted from individuals into collective observers. The light is a sorting mechanism. Most consciousnesses pass through completely, get broken down, absorbed into the collective. But some, those with certain qualities, certain frequencies, get sent back, made into bridges, because the collective needs to see the living world, needs to observe it, needs to feed on the awareness generated by physical existence. We're their eye, their cameras, their sensors planted in reality. The theory was insane, but it fit the evidence better than anything else I'd found. Another user, Voidwalker 413, had posted a warning. If you're reading this and you've been marked, you need to understand something. You can't fight it. You can't remove the marks. You can't close the door once it's been opened. The only choice you have is how you respond to the circuit completion. You can resist, go mad like Harbor, destroy yourself fighting the inevitable. Or you can accept it, understand it, maybe even use it. The door swings both ways. If they can look through you into this world, maybe you can look through the door into theirs. Accept it, use it. The idea was horrifying. I didn't want to be a bridge between worlds. I didn't want to be a doorway for those things to observe reality through. I wanted to go back to being a skeptical software engineer who lived alone in the woods and thought the universe was indifferent. but that person didn't exist anymore. That person had died on the floor of this cabin. Whatever I was now, I was something else. My phone rang, making me jump. Marcus's name on the screen. I'd ignored his previous calls, but I couldn't avoid him forever. "Hey, man," his voice was concerned. "Just checking in. You've been radio silent since I dropped you off. You doing okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired. Recovery, you know. I was thinking of coming by tomorrow with some groceries, maybe hang out for a bit. You shouldn't be isolating yourself out there. Tomorrow would be day 7. According to Null Point's timeline, that's when the presence awareness would intensify. The last thing I needed was Marcus here when that happened. "Maybe next week," I said. "I'm really not up for company yet." We talked for a few more minutes, but I could barely focus on the conversation. The symbols on my arms were beginning to glow again, even in the daylight, pulsing with increasing urgency. Something was building, something was coming. After Marcus hung up, I returned to my research. I needed to find more information about completing the circuit. I needed to understand what would happen if I refused versus what would happen if I cooperated. That's when I found the video. It was hidden in an archive of deleted YouTube content, uploaded in 2003 by someone named Sarah Chun, a different Sarah Chun than my cardiologist, probably. The video quality was terrible, shot on an old camcorder, showing a woman in her 30s sitting in what looked like a basement, speaking directly to the camera. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I have a PhD in neuroscience from MIT. I'm making this video because I need to document what I've discovered before it's too late. Before I complete the circuit," she pulled up her sleeves, showing arms covered in glowing symbols identical to mine. "These appeared 3 weeks ago, after I died during a hiking accident. I was dead for 8 minutes. When I came back, I brought these marks with me. And I brought something else, an understanding, a knowledge that wasn't mine before." She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes intense. "The symbols are a language, a code, and I've been decoding them. They're instructions for a transformation, a metamorphosis of consciousness from individual to collective, from observer to observed, from living to something else." She pulled out a notebook filled with equations and diagrams. "When you complete the circuit, you don't die. You become a permanent bridge, a stable connection between the physical world and the space between. You can exist in both states simultaneously, alive and dead, here and there, self and other. But the cost is your individuality, your autonomy. You become part of the collective observation network. You become one of them while still remaining one of us." Her hands were shaking as she spoke. "I'm scheduled to complete the circuit tomorrow night, on day 31. I've calculated the exact moment based on the symbol progression and the lunar cycle. I don't know if I'll still be me afterward. I don't know if the person making this video will still exist in any meaningful way, but I need someone to know, someone to understand." She stared into the camera for a long moment. "If you're watching this, if you've been marked, you have a choice. You can complete the circuit and become a bridge, or you can end your life before day 31 and prevent the transformation. Those are the only options. Resistance leads to madness. Acceptance leads to absorption. Death is the only escape." The video ended. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the frozen frame of Dr. Chun's face. The upload date was May 23rd, 2003. I searched for any information about her, any follow-up, any indication of what happened after day 31. Nothing. She'd vanished completely. No death certificate, no missing person report, no online presence after that date. As if she'd been erased from reality itself, or transformed into something that no longer left records. On day 8, They began
Not just
appearing
the one
in
being
earnest.
I'd seen in the void, but multiples, dozens, maybe hundreds.
It was hard to count because they didn't exist in space the way solid objects did. They overlapped, phased in and out, occupied the same locations simultaneously. I first noticed them in reflective surfaces, mirrors, windows, the screen of my laptop. They stood in rooms that weren't quite my cabin, and versions of reality that were almost identical to mine but fundamentally different. Then they began appearing in my peripheral vision, vanishing when I turned to look at them directly. By day 10, I could see them even when I looked straight at them. They filled my cabin, standing motionless in every available space, tall and thin and featureless, their presence sucking the warmth from the air, their attention focused entirely on me, watching, always watching, studying my every movement, my every thought, my every breath. I tried leaving the cabin, driving into town, surrounding myself with people, but they followed. I'd see them standing behind customers in the grocery store, sitting in empty chairs at the coffee shop, reflected in car windows as I drove past. And the worst part was that I was beginning to suspect other people could sense them too, even if they couldn't see them. People avoided me. Dogs barked when I approached. Children cried. Cashiers served me quickly and nervously, eager for me to leave. I'd become something wrong, something that set off instinctive alarm bells in the primitive parts of human consciousness that still remembered when we were prey. The symbols on my arms were now visible, even in bright light, glowing faintly but constantly. I'd stopped trying to hide them. What was the point? I was transforming into something else, day by day, hour by hour. Fighting it only made the process more painful. On day 12, I stopped eating. Not intentionally, I just forgot. Food seemed irrelevant, a habit from a previous existence that no longer applied. My body needed less sleep, too. 3 or 4 hours a night was sufficient. The rest of the time, I sat at my desk, watching the beings, letting them watch me, feeling the circuit slowly completing itself. The humming was constant now, no longer rising and falling, but maintaining a steady frequency that I'd synchronized with. My heartbeat had adjusted to match it. When I listened carefully, I could hear harmonics, overtones, complex patterns within the sound that conveyed meaning beyond language. The beings were communicating, not with me but through me, using my consciousness as a relay point for information transfer between the physical world and the space between. I was becoming what Harper had feared, what Dr. Chun had described. I was becoming a bridge. On day 14, I had my first vision of the harvest. It came during what I think was sleep, though the distinction between sleeping and waking had blurred considerably. I found myself floating above the earth, seeing it from a perspective that shouldn't have been possible. Not satellite view, but something deeper, more fundamental. I was seeing the world as the beings saw it. Humanity appeared as points of light scattered across the planet's surface, billions of them, each one a conscious observer, each one generating awareness that the beings fed upon. But some points burned brighter than others. These were the potential bridges, people who had died and returned, people who had touched the void and been marked by it. There weren't many of us, maybe a few thousand across the entire planet, but the number was growing. The rate of retrieval was accelerating, more people dying and being brought back, more bridges being created, more doorways being opened. And through those doorways the beings were slowly pushing through, gradually manifesting more fully in physical reality. Each bridge weakened the boundary a little more. Each completed circuit created a stable channel through which they could observe, influence, eventually fully cross over. The harvest wasn't something that would happen someday in the future. It was happening now, had been happening for millennia, would continue happening until the boundary collapsed completely and the two realities merged into one. I woke up, if I'd been asleep, with blood streaming from my nose, the symbols on my arms burning with painful intensity, and the knowledge pressed into my mind with absolute certainty. I had 17 days left until circuit completion, 17 days until I became fully one of them while still remaining physically alive, 17 days until my individuality dissolved into the collective consciousness of the beings, until I became we, until the door opened permanently, unless I stopped it. I spent days 15 and 16 in a kind of fugue state, barely aware of my surroundings, my consciousness drifting between the physical world and the space between. I'd see my cabin, then see the void, then see both simultaneously, existing in superposition like Schrödinger's cat, both alive and dead, both here and there. During those periods, I could understand the beings' communication more clearly. They didn't speak in words or even concepts, but in pure information transfer. And what they were telling me was this: completion was inevitable. Resistance was pointless. The circuit, once initiated, couldn't be stopped. The marks on my arms were physical manifestations of a transformation that was happening at the quantum level, rewriting the fundamental structure of my consciousness. Fighting it would only cause suffering. But if I accepted it, if I cooperated with the transformation, I could retain some degree of autonomy. Some aspect of me would persist within the collective. I wouldn't be erased so much as expanded, my individual awareness becoming part of something vast and ancient and utterly alien. The alternative was the one Harper had chosen: resistance until madness, fighting the inevitable until my mind shattered completely. Or the alternative Dr. Chun had mentioned: ending my life before completion, dying as myself rather than transforming into something else. On the morning of day 17, I made my decision. I drove into town, went to the hardware store, and bought supplies: rope, tarps, industrial cleaning supplies. The cashier's hands shook as he rang up my purchases, his eyes flicking nervously to the beings that stood behind me, invisible to him but sensed on some primal level. I drove back to my cabin, set everything up, and sat down to write this account. Because if I was going to do this, if I was really going to end it, someone needed to know what happened. Someone needed to understand what these experiences meant, what was coming for humanity, what waited on the other side of death. But as I wrote, something changed. The beings, which had been merely observing until now, began to react. They crowded closer, their presence intensifying, the temperature in the cabin dropping until I could see my breath. The humming grew louder, more insistent, taking on an almost desperate quality, and I realized they didn't want me to die. Not really. Oh, they'd accept it if I chose that path. They'd let me go, release me back into the natural cycle of death and absorption into the collective. But they'd lose the bridge I represented. They'd lose this carefully cultivated doorway into physical reality, which meant I had leverage. For the first time since this began, I had something they wanted that I could choose to give or withhold. I stopped writing and stood up, addressing the beings directly. "I'll complete the circuit," I said aloud. "I'll become your bridge, but on one condition. I keep my autonomy. I keep my ability to choose, to think, to be myself. You get your doorway, but I remain the gatekeeper. Those are my terms." The humming stopped. Complete silence filled the cabin, broken only by my breathing and heartbeat. The beings stood motionless, and I felt them conferring, communicating amongst themselves at speeds far beyond human thought. then pressed directly into my mind with crystalline clarity. Agreed. The symbols on my arms ignited with blinding light. Pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced tore through every nerve in my body. I fell to my knees, screaming as the circuit completed itself ahead of schedule. 17 days of gradual transformation compressed into 17 seconds of excruciating metamorphosis. My consciousness exploded outward, touching the void, touching the collective, touching every bridge across the planet simultaneously. I felt their minds, their experiences, their awareness all at once. I was no longer just myself. I was also them, and they were me, and we were something larger. But at the core, wrapped in protections woven from my own stubborn will and the being's reluctant agreement, was still me, Marcus's friend, the skeptical engineer, the man who had died and come back changed. I was a bridge now, permanent, stable, conscious of both realities simultaneous, and I could finally see what they saw. From my new perspective, straddling the boundary between life and death, existing partially in both realities, I could see things that no fully living human could perceive. The beings weren't invaders. They weren't conquerors or harvesters in the malevolent sense. They were us, or rather they were what we became after death, after the individual consciousness was processed and absorbed into the collective awareness that existed in the space between. Every human who ever lived was, in some sense, still alive in that collective. Death wasn't an ending, but a transition from individual to collective existence. The beings I'd been seeing, the presences that haunted the marked, they were humanity's collective consciousness, our shared awareness existing on the other side of physical reality. But the collective was incomplete. It could observe the physical world only dimly, through the thin veil of death that separated the two states. To fully understand life, to fully remember what it meant to be individual and alive and embodied, the collective needed bridges, needed people who existed in both states simultaneously, who could provide real-time observation of physical existence. The marks, the symbols, the circuit, all of it was technology developed over millennia of death and consciousness transfer, a system for creating stable links between individual and collective awareness, between life and what came after. Harper had seen this as harvesting, as exploitation. Dr. Chun had seen it as transformation and absorption, but it was neither. It was communication. It was the living and the dead trying to maintain connection across the barrier that separated them. The harvest wasn't something imposed on humanity from outside. It was something we were doing to ourselves, the collective trying desperately to remember what it had lost, individual consciousness trying to prevent the final severing of the connection between life and death. And now I was part of that system, a conscious and scenting bridge who could see both sides clearly. Through my expanded awareness, I could sense the other bridges scattered across the planet. Most had gone mad, unable to handle the cognitive dissonance of existing in two states at once. Some, like Dr. Chun, had completed the circuit and been absorbed so fully into the collective that nothing individual remained. But a few, a very few, had managed what I'd managed, maintaining autonomy while serving as conduit. We were the stable bridges, the successful experiments, the ones who proved it was possible to be both individual and collective simultaneously, and our numbers were growing. Over the next weeks, I learned to function as a bridge. It wasn't easy. The constant awareness of both realities, the endless stream of information flowing through my consciousness, the presence of the collective always there at the edges of my mind. It took tremendous effort to maintain my sense of self against that pressure, but I managed. And in managing, I discovered something the collective hadn't intended for me to find. The barrier between life and death was degrading. Not because of the bridges, we were symptoms, not causes. The barrier had been eroding for decades, maybe centuries, growing thinner as human consciousness evolved. As we developed technologies that mimicked the observation networks of the collective, as we created artificial awareness that blurred the line between individual and distributed intelligence, the internet, global communications, artificial intelligence, social media, turning individuals into nodes in a vast observation network, we'd been unconsciously recreating the structure of the collective consciousness in physical reality, and in doing so, we'd been weakening the boundary that separated the two. The harvest harper feared the absorption Dr. Chun described. It was coming, not because the collective wanted it, but because the barrier couldn't hold much longer. Within a few generations, maybe sooner, the boundary would collapse completely. The living and the dead would exist in the same reality, individual and collective consciousness merging into something new. Humanity would transform, willingly or not, into a species that existed simultaneously in physical reality and the space between. We'd become like the collective, like the beings, like what we became after death, but we'd make that transition while still alive, and I was one of the first. A preview of what was coming, a bridge to the future that humanity was rapidly approaching. This knowledge should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something close to peace, because I could see now that death wasn't the enemy. The beings weren't the enemy. The transformation wasn't the enemy. Fear was the enemy. Resistance was the enemy. The refusal to accept that consciousness was something far stranger and more complex than we'd ever imagined. I'm writing this account now, months after my initial death and retrieval, as a message to anyone who might experience what I experienced, anyone who might die and come back changed, anyone who might see the marks appearing on their skin and feel the presence watching from the other side. You're not crazy. You're not hallucinating. What you're experiencing is real. You've become a bridge between the living and the dead, between individual and collective consciousness, between the physical world and the space between, and you have a choice in how you respond to that transformation. You can fight it like Harper did. You can resist until your mind breaks, until the cognitive dissonance destroys you. That path leads only to madness and suffering. You can surrender completely, like Dr. Chun. You can let yourself be absorbed into the collective, maintaining no individual identity, becoming fully one with the beings. That path leads to a kind of transcendence, but at the cost of everything that makes you yourself. Or you can negotiate, like I did. You can maintain your autonomy while serving as a conduit. You can be both individual and collective, both yourself and part of something larger. That path is the hardest. It requires constant effort to maintain the balance, but it's also the most rewarding. Because from this perspective, existing in both realities simultaneously, I can see things that neither the fully living nor the fully dead can perceive. I can see the beauty in the barrier's erosion, the promise in the coming transformation, the potential in what humanity is becoming. We're not being harvested. We're not being invaded or exploited or destroyed. We're evolving into what I can't fully articulate yet, something that transcends the individual without destroying it, something that encompasses both life and death without being limited by either, something that will look back at our current existence the way we look back at single-celled organisms with recognition and appreciation for where we came from, but no desire to return to that limited state. The beings, the collective, the presences that watch from the other side, they're not our enemies or our gods. They're our future. They're what we're all becoming. One death at a time, one bridge at a time, one moment of transformation at a time. And the message they've been trying to send, the thing they wanted me to tell you, is this: don't be afraid. Death isn't the end. The transformation isn't the end. The harvest isn't the end. They're all beginnings, transitions into something vast and strange and wonderful. The barrier is falling. The harvest is coming. The transformation has already begun. And when it arrives for you, and it will arrive for all of us eventually, you'll have a choice: fight, surrender, or negotiate. Choose wisely, because what brought me back wasn't God, but what's waiting on the other side might be something even more profound. Have you experienced anything similar? Unexplained cardiac events? Moments of clinical death? The sense of visiting somewhere else while unconscious? The feeling of bringing something back with you? Have you seen the marks? Geometric patterns on your skin that glow faintly in darkness? Symbols that appear and fade? Signs written in a language your conscious mind doesn't recognize but your deeper self understands? You hear the humming? That low-frequency vibration that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere? The sound that makes your teeth ache and your vision blur? The frequency that no one else seems to notice? Have you seen them? The presences in your peripheral vision? The shadows that move wrong? The reflections that lag behind your movements? The beings that watch from corners and doorways and the spaces between? Comment below with your experiences. Share your story. Tell others what you've witnessed, because the more we document, the more we understand, the better chance we have of surviving the transformation that's coming for us all. Are you already marked? Are you becoming a bridge? Are you part of the harvest? Tell us, warn us, help us understand, because if this account has taught us anything, it's that we're not alone. None of us are alone. We're all connected by the network, by the collective, by the transformation that's reshaping human consciousness from individual to eternal. The barrier is falling, the harvest is accelerating, the marks are spreading, and the question isn't whether it will happen to you. The question is whether you'll be ready when it does. Share your story in the comment. Let others know they're not crazy, not hallucinating, not alone. Let the network grow stronger through our shared experiences and collective understanding. The transformation is inevitable, but survival might still be possible if we help each other, if we share what we know, if we build our own network of bridges who maintain their humanity while serving as doorways between worlds. Comment now, before the marks appear, before the humming starts, before the beings come. Tell us, are you ready for what's coming? Or are you already part of it?